It started with an argument with her mother about money. About money. And at some point in this argument, Mama said, God bless the child that's got his own. God bless the child that's got his own money. Them that's got shall have, them that's not shall lose. So the Bible says, and it still is news. Mama may have, Papa may have, but God bless the child that's got his own. And it was in reflecting on that argument that day that Billie Holiday, together with Art Herzog, wrote that beautiful, haunting, and brutally truthful song, God Bless the Child. It's a song about poverty, and it reflects her own intimate knowledge of child and experience of childhood poverty, but it also speaks to the timelessness, the presence of poverty throughout history. What did she quote? What Bible passage? Probably this one. Remember where it said, so the Bible says, and it still is news? Probably Matthew 29, for to all those who have, more will be given, but from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. Oh, that sounds so harsh, doesn't it? From the words of Jesus? Are they the words of Jesus? Well, sort of. Sort of in the sense that these are the words Jesus put in the mouth of a character of one of his parables. So it wasn't Jesus' teaching, but he was teaching through a parable when he said these words. And anybody remember which parable this could be? Matthew 25? Any guesses, Jean? Yes. Ding, ding, ding. Good job. It's the parable of the talents. And that's important to remember because when you look at these words, it's easy to misunderstand that God is saying, that Jesus might be saying, God gives rich people even more money and takes money from poor people. But that's not what the parable says. The parable says that there is a master who is always ready to invest more in those who are always ready to invest more and even risk in the master's purpose. Do you hear that? And that the master is ready to take away what's valuable from those who are unwilling to risk for the master's purposes. Those who want to play it safe, the master will take away. That's the story in the parable. Now this passage from today's gospel lesson in John, you always have the poor with you. Those are the words of Jesus in teaching his disciples there in Bethany at the home of his friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. You always have the poor with you. And those words have been misinterpreted probably since they left Jesus' lips. And the way they've been misinterpreted is to spiritualize them, which means to say Jesus didn't really mean to come and save the poor from their economic poverty, just their spiritual poverty. Because he said, you always have the poor. But that's not what he meant. These words are so easily used to placate the poor, to pacify the poor, with the idea that, well, one day in heaven, You'll have those shoes and that robe and that crown. And that's all the good news you're going to get. It's all about after you die. Have you heard that? But those who misinterpret these words of Jesus forget that Jesus taught all of us to pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Could poverty, economic poverty, be part of God's kingdom? I think not. But not only that, the passage itself tells us that Jesus and his disciples practiced giving money to relieve the suffering of the poor. They gave money to the poor. How do we know? Judas says so. And he even says or suggests to us that it was their practice to sell gifts that had been given to them so they could have more money to relieve the suffering of the poor. Have you ever sold something really valuable so that you could have more money to give to the poor? John Wesley did. Remember, he was taking the paintings off the walls so he could sell them and give more money to the poor. So what's happening in this passage? There's an argument going on between Judas, right? And who? Judas and who? Jesus. About what? About money? About this gift, the value. There we go. Thank you, choir. They're always on it. The value of what is being given to Jesus. So what does Judas value in this argument? Now, notwithstanding, John wants us to know he's a thief. He's really not interested in the poor. But let's just take him at his word. He says, how much was that worth? Anybody remember? A lot. Yes. 300 silver pieces. Does that sound like a lot to you? Any of you have 300 silver pieces at home? I know you have a lot of coins, Kyle, but I doubt they're silver pieces, right? That's a lot of money. In Jesus' time, you know how much that is? That's your entire wages for a year. A man. Think about that. First thing you have to ask is, how did she come up with that money? Where'd she get that? I don't know. But clearly they are on the wealthier side of things because they often hosted Jesus and all of the disciples in their home, meaning they had the resources to do that. But she comes up with this much, a pound of nard. I know what a pound is. Keep trying to lose them. A pound of nard, that's an unbelievable amount of value. But what does Mary value? What is Mary valuing in this scene? What does she value? Yes, her love of Jesus. Jesus means a lot to her. It's worth it to her to spend that much on his presence right there and then. Now, she doesn't know what he knows. He says, she's preparing me for my burial. What's that worth? How much have you spent on a burial? A lot. Yeah. What's it worth? It was worth that much. So we have what's essentially a conflict of values going on. Do we spend this on relieving the suffering of the poor, or do we spend it on who Jesus is and what he means to us right now? In his mind, while you have me, right? Remember that question Jesus asks the guys, the disciples? Who do you say I am? In this passage, Mary of Bethany, not Mary Magdalene, Mary of Bethany answers the question. This is who he is for me. With this act of love and devotion and care for him in that moment and that time. This is how she responds with everything she's got. Think of the extravagance of her giving to Jesus in that moment. And so Jesus says, the poor are with you always, but not me. So what does that mean to us today? The poor are with you always. Let's look at a snapshot. This is just a quick snapshot of what poverty looks like just in this country. We're not even doing global. Just in this country based on race and ethnicity. And these are figures from 2014. White, 10.1%. Asian, 12%. Hispanic, this does not count those who are undocumented, obviously, 23.6%. Black, African American, 26.2%. Native American, 28.3%. And that does not count those living on reservations where it goes sky high, unbelievably high. Look at those numbers. A reflection of poverty these days in the United States of America. See those numbers? If you can't see the collusion of race and power and privilege in those numbers, then your only option is to believe that the rest of us are just truly lazy and shiftless. Does that make sense? Here's a couple of other that I think you should be aware of. Seniors, 13.5% of all seniors are in poverty, and 18% of all children are in poverty in our country. The United Nations report places the United States the second highest developed nation with the most children in poverty. Second highest of all developed nations. This is one of my sheroes, Marian Wright Edelman. In my never humble opinion, the greatest activist and advocate for children that our country has ever known. Marian Wright Edelman. She established the Children's Defense Fund. She said this about childhood poverty in our country. We don't have a money problem in America. We have a values and priorities problem. A values and priorities problem. Do you remember that old, there used to be, I think it was an old bumper sticker. It came to mind. I think it used to say something like, can you imagine a world or a country in which the schools have all the money they need and the military has to have a bake sale? Right? Something like that. Again, it's a conflict of values. It's an argument going on. Who should get what? Who's worth what? What's worth what? But I want really to show you this quote from Dr. Edelman, because I think it's so important. The future which we hold in trust for our own children, are you listening, parents? The future which we hold in trust for our own children will be shaped by our fairness to other people's children. Do you believe that's true? The future of our children will be shaped by our fairness to other people's children. That is really close to God's definition of justice and Jesus' definition of abundant life It's another way to say that. I believe that's so much so that I remember hearing words coming out of my mouth saying that if you hadn't already put a child through college, that perhaps Christian discipleship could mean for you to put someone else's child through college. Is that presumptuous? You bet it is. Thank you, Lois. You bet it is. In the country of I'm free to do anything I want with my money, yes, that's presumptuous. But is it to the Christ who, in this passage, calls our attention? He makes sure everyone in the room notices the extravagant generosity, the extravagant giving in recognition of the power of God that is present in the here and right now of their lives. I hear in Dr. Edelman's words a Christian call to value the presence of God. What God's power can do to change that snapshot of poverty in the United States, to change the future of all of our children. That's what I hear in her words. I hear her asking that question Jesus asked, who do you say I am? Who do you say I am by what you're willing to give, by what it's worth to you to engage someone else's child's future? What's it worth? Well, it depends on what's Jesus worth to you. What do you value? What extravagant gift of devotion to Christ will you give to see God's will done on earth as it is in heaven for all God's children? What is it worth to you? What are we not giving? Where are we holding back? Oh, Lenten questions for our hearts and our pocketbooks. Where are we holding back? What is it worth to you? Let me invite you to remember the extravagant gifts that we have all received in the presence of children among us and their needs among us.